Welcome to Face for the Newsfirst team. I'm Niresh Aliathambi. My guest tonight is Dr. Rohantha Athukorala, Vice Chairman of the World Rural Tourism Council. We are here to talk about tourism and Sri Lanka and the economy in general as we go further into 2025. Welcome, Dr. Rohantha.
Thank you very much, Naresh.
Good to have you back after some time on Face to Face.
Thank you.
Right. Just for the benefit of our viewers, Dr. Rohantha served as the chairman of the Export Development Board and the chairman of Sri Lanka Tourism, among his many accolades and positions. So Rohantha, let's start with the economy in general. Is the economy on track? And this is in the backdrop of having several disastrous years, starting with COVID, then going on to the bankruptcy under Gotabaya Rajapaksa's regime, and then of course we had 2 years under President Ranil Wickremesinghe, which served to balance the books a little bit and get us to a position which, in macro terms, it might look okay, but it caused a lot of hardship for the population, and it didn't grow the economy very much, but we did go back into positive growth. But now, 2025, how is our economy doing? Are we on the right path?
It's a very interesting question, Dinesh, because from one side we see statistics, and from another side we see the reality in the home. So, there's upbeat saying that the GDP has crossed 5.2% GDP growth. Last year, we have most of the sectors which are up and running. And things look very positive with regard to overall exports crossing, I think, something like $16.7 billion. Tourism also doing good, and double-digit growth. So there is a kind of a positive sentiment which is going around, and I think the most important point is that the forecast that were given by the World Bank and IMF was about 3.5%, and we have beaten that to hit 5% plus, which is good news. But then from the other side, the issue is that if you look at the households which are having an income which exceeds their spend on a monthly basis, it is only 44%, which means you have almost 56% of the population whose income doesn't cover the expenditure on a month-to-month basis. And this is research data from Peppercube. So it's one of the yardsticks by which all the FMCG companies work. So
56% of Sri Lankan households spend more money than they earn.
Yeah. And
that's staggering.
Absolutely. Last July, it was something like 9%, and by the time December came, it went up to around 30%. So things are improving. And a lot of people are upbeat with regard to the election result. But what we have to keep in mind is that in July, it was between 9 to 10% of the population whose income exceeded the spend.
Right. So it was about 91%, which where the households actually didn't earn enough for their monthly expenses.
Yeah.
And then that came down to about 70%,
yeah.
And now it is down to 56%.
56%.
So getting better.
It's getting better, but the challenge here is that is the reality that we are faced with, and that reality, Naresh, compounds to where people are trading down on the pack sizes of the products that they buy. They are moved away from certain categories like the yogurts and the soups, and they are into more basic. So whilst you see the statistics which are good, and there is some kind of upbeat in the economy, At the household end, the consumer and the housewife is yet challenged. So until we see that impact easing out, it's only just one group of people who are saying things are looking positive. So if you go to any restaurant, or if you try to go to a restaurant on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, everything is booked. You can't get in. But that happens to be that 44%. So
Right.
so that house, so you can't judge the quality of life on that 44%.
Now, let's look at the definition of what is a restaurant. I mean, to Colombo people, it's somewhere in Kolpiti, Bambalapiti, Vailavatta, in a five-star hotel. But if you go to the less affluent sections of Colombo itself, go to Grand Pass, go to Matakulya, go to Maradana, and then you come to basically what are the Kottukades, right? And when you go to those, well, you think back 5 years ago, that a Kottukade was a place where you had to wait. You had to wait in line because there was so much business. But now it's still not so. It's a lot better than a year or two ago.
Yeah.
But that's that level, that segment of the population, which is the vast majority, is still struggling.
So what happens is that when you have this kind of a disruption at the household end, you have that same impact happening at the organization end, and you see consumption shrinking, you see the top line being challenged, and that puts a lot of pressure on people, and that in turn makes you wanting to do different new things in terms of making sure that you can keep your company alive. So though things look good on the surface, there are many challenges that are coming to play, and I think end of March is going to be very critical, because you have the Parate law going out, and then you also have the moratorium which will come to end, and we know that almost 52% of the economy is SMEs, and it is these SMEs which overall debt stock has now gone up to something like 1.3 trillion, and your NPLs, which are like 7-8%, has now gone up to almost 36-37%. So that's a kind of challenge that we are faced with. So the next 3 months is absolutely critical.
So is the economy, and when I say the economy, I mean the SMEs, the businesses which need to grow in order for the country's economy to grow. Do they have that access to capital which they require to set up a new shop, to buy an expanded line of goods, to hire more staff? Is it there, or are they still hamstrung because of the issues that they had financially over the last 5 years?
See, you have access to finance, but then the question is that in terms of the collateral which is required, and the cost of that finance, it's like kind of puts a lot of pressure on somebody's startup. So that's the challenge that is there, and I think that's what the call of the government for the banks, saying if the kind of money that the banks are making in terms of profits, they're asking, is there somebody that you can support the SME sector? And that is the call of the SME sector, because they continuously say something very interesting. They said, our NPLs are 7%, and we continue to give, say, about $48 to $50 billion every year to the government, and they are saying, today we yet give you $36 to $40 billion, but now our NPLs are at 36%, and this is not what we created. This was created by bad management of the economy. So it's your duty to look after us, because we look after the economy. So it's a very interesting challenge.
So that's what the banks are saying.
It's what the SMEs are saying. SMEs are saying. So the point I'm saying, the economy looks very strong. It's on the correct direction. But then the question is that, we know that at the consumer end, you're challenged. So that's point one. Point two, Naresh, is that, if you look at our expenditure versus income, it's a 7.2 trillion against a 4.9 million. So we are at a deficit here. Now the question is that, that gap needs to be covered. Now that cannot be covered by taxes. It doesn't work. I mean, you even if you were to double your taxes of income from 36 to 72%, and you increase your corporate tax, you double it from 18 to, let's say, 36%, yet you cannot, we'll have to yet keep borrowing. So the only way that we can drive that is by driving our exports and our tourisms. Now if you don't have a strategy of driving these two, that is where we can get out of our debt. So with regard to the economy, numbers look good, but we have to have a very aggressive strategy where we move our exports, which are at about 16.7 billion, to about 25-27 billion, and of course our tourism numbers must go to about 7-8 billion, which we can. We have a product which is very good, which is what Amitabh Khan, the guy who developed the whole global positioning for India, the Incredible India campaign, came and voiced very vociferously. He said, I love this country. You guys have a fantastic potential, but you need to position the brand. So now, if you don't drive these two, what happens is we are struggling. We are not really saying that by 2028 we can meet the challenges.
Now, Rohantha, what is Sri Lanka's brand image? Now, if you say India, you get this vision of a country which, yes, it has 1.5 billion people, but it's forward thinking, it's growing, there's a certain dynamism which is associated with it. And when you visit India, you see it. You see highways being constructed, the airports are now ultra modern. You see it's happening. If you say Singapore, well, you get this image immediately in your mind that it's efficient, it's clean, it's neat, it's law and order, very little corruption, and so on. And it's a great place to do business. Malaysia, similar. You get this image, right? But what is Sri Lanka's image? Now, our image 3 years ago was Aragalaya, a nation which had been plunged into chaos by the powers that be, right, by the government. So our image was one where it's a country that's very badly run. But what is it now? What's our brand image?
See, the answer to your question, Naresh, is that the current awareness globally about Sri Lanka is only 4%. I mean, that's the reality from the latest data that we have. Now, if you go and ask somebody, what do you think of Sri Lanka? The most common thoughts that come happens to be, the war, LTT war. They would then come out with the tsunami, and then you will have the Easter attacks, and then lately you have this whole strong share of voice that happened globally on this whole thing called the financial crisis. Your country was bankrupt. So these are the kinds of strong headlines that we were associated with. So you're right. I mean, we need to have that new positioning of Sri Lanka where the brand stands, and I think there's so much of good going. I mean, if you look at the last 1 year, the kind of accolades that Sri Lanka has won, the best for solo travel of female, the best destination for family travel. It's a latest accolade that
the Pico Trail,
Pico Trail, Sigiriya, just got the best destination sustainability kind of award globally. So we have something good going, but then what we have to understand is that these are all tactical, but we need to have that strategic campaign, and I mean, I hate comparing, but given that in this position of the world rural tourism, I tend to travel to the whole Asia Pacific. There are about 28 countries that I kind of overlook, and there what I see is that most of these top end destinations like the Malaysias and the Maldives of the world, they have about 23 marketing communication mix elements that they use. They have fam tours for celebrities, they have fam tours for travel agents, they have some people who are designated only to go and meet celebrities and bring them to your destination. Like they have a target saying, I want the top 6, the best tennis players, the best singers, the Lady Gagas of the world, bring Ronaldo here, so, and they give say 3 weeks holiday. So apart from that, of course, they have the digital campaign, and they also have the TV, radio, multimedia campaign in terms of positioning the brand. So they use about 23-24 elements. So now we use maybe a couple of elements. We yet go for the exhibitions, and we have a digital campaign that is rolling out, kind of a thing. So we have to get into that mainstream. We got to do the big thing. Some countries have 3 global campaigns that they roll out for a given year.
But you're talking mainly tourism campaigns. What about the nation's brand? What you're not necessarily thinking as a tourist. You just hear, okay, Gaza, okay. The brand image is terrible, right? Ukraine, the brand image is terrible. Yeah. But if you say Las Vegas, it's a different brand image. And I mean, I'm not going to Ukraine or Gaza or Las Vegas, but the brand image is there, which has been created. If it's a negative one, it's, something terrible has happened. But if it's a positive one, it's because it has been created, not just by the tourism authorities, but by everyone. If you take Las Vegas, it's the state of Nevada, it's the city of Las Vegas, and so on, which is, I mean, yes, they look at tourism, but it's all about their state, isn't it? So who should be in charge of branding Sri Lanka?
See, what we see in the world is that tourism tends to drive the identity at a global level. If you take the Maldives of the world, they are known for tourism, and that's why people would come. If you look at Kenya, they would say, well, it's safaris. So tourism drives that identity. But then if you want to get a stronger dimension in terms of where you want to have a higher demand for your quality of exports, and you want to look at quality destinations that are saying, I want your brand and the products that you have, or if you're saying that I want FDIs to start flourishing in that relevant country, then you need this concept of a nation brand. But then, Niresh, what the latest thinking what comes out is that you don't go and try to put a name or put some attributes on a brand and you want to tell the world, that time has gone, because the world is also not foolish. So they want to have that depth in you, and that is to see whether you really live those values. So in that perspective, I love this campaign of Clean Sri Lanka. Though we thought Clean Sri Lanka is much more to do with what you see, it is more of a depth of who you are and the kinds of values that you need to have. Those key pillars virtually that a good strong nation brand should have is in that campaign. So over time, if we can, and we will, I suppose, we'll have no option but live those values, then naturally people will all start thinking of us in that manner. It's a prosperous country, smiling faces, and all this concept of like saying, I'm not into corruption, I'm into talking straight, you can do strong business with me, all those propositions come. And there are that campaign, if you really study, there are 9 legs to it, and if this can be like activated over a period of 1 to 2 years, a kind of an image will start building in the world, and then that in turn will start giving you an identity where people will say, I want Ceylon tea, I really want, I want Ceylon cinnamon, I want the Ceylon sapphire, and now you got GI indication for Ceylon cinnamon, which means that you are differentiated from cassia of the world, and you're prepared to pay a premium, because I mean, in the day we, I think, supply 90% of the world's demand on cinnamon. Then of course you'll have the tourism coming in, latching on to. So ideally I think we have got that opportunity. And when you actually travel around the world, Naresh, you see our neighboring countries are in a lot of trouble. I mean, that in one country there is absolute political turmoil, and it has been going on for the last, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, and it's such a strong nation, but then end of the day, they're stifled on growth. You also have certain neighboring countries where their expenditure is much more than their income, and they can't pay their bill in 2026, and they've often said that we are heading to be another bankrupt country. They've announced. So when you look at our total neighborhood, Sri Lanka is very beautifully poised at a 5% GDP growth, and we are so strongly linked to India, which is driving at about a 7% GDP growth. Now the question is, how do you develop strategy that you can increase your share of your exports, that the import bill of India can be at least 5%. I mean, currently it's something like 0.05%. Our total exports to India under the free trade agreement is about, I think, $500 million, and it has been there for the last like 8-9 years. So now if we could make that exports to India with the FTA, make it say 2.5 to 3 billion. I'm not looking at trade, exports out of Sri Lanka. And you have certain things, like for example, you have 15,000 kilograms of tea, which is under the FTA. Then you have, I think, 7 million pieces of apparel. And we know that there are challenges in the US market. And chances are that we can look at the opportunity of the middle class with India. So, now the question is that you might have all the technical aspects sorted out, but then you know that the blockage happens to be at the political level because of the non-tariff barriers. So we need that political kind of muscle to clear that, and I think together with that, from what we see, we will suddenly see the identity of the brand picking up. So the question that I again go back to is that 56% of the people, of the population, their income is lesser than their expenditure. So how long will people wait to see these strategies to unfold? Because end of the day, they want to put food on the table. So that is our challenge that we have, Niresh.
But Rohantha, at the same time, 56% is terrible, but it's a lot better than 91%.
Oh yeah.
So hopefully that positive trend will continue, and perhaps by the end of the year we can come down to half that number, which would be great. Now you mentioned the term non-tariff barriers, which is a very dignified way of describing all the rubbish that businesses and exporters and importers have to put up with, mainly from the government sector, in order to do business. Mismanagement, corruption, just basically taking so long to clear something through customs. So many issues. Transport issues, our highways aren't up to it, our railways are not up to it. So many issues which you can call it non-tariff barriers, but basically these are the aspects which foreign investors look at, and even local investors will look at that. Now there are so many local businessmen, entrepreneurs who are investing in other countries rather than investing here. We think it's a great thing, but then in a way yes, but mainly no. Why aren't they investing here? Because of these non-tariff barriers. How do we clean this up?
See, it's like this, Naresh. I mean, a lot of people forget that we were just out of a 30-year-old war, and then we got into a challenge with regard to the Easter bomb, and then after that we got this whole thing of the financial crisis, and we know that our current systems are archaic. The current systems are archaic. We are in the 1940s and 50s. Now, why is that? That is the cost of the war, and that is where you had the countries like the Bangladesh and the Vietnams who did the reforms that were required, and because of that, in 1990 our total exports were about 4 billion, all of us, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. But today Bangladesh is at 53 billion, Vietnam is at about 320 billion, and we are struggling at 16 billion, 16.5 billion. Now, why is that? Because that was the cost of a war. Now, for us to, in that perspective, when you have this kind of shocks that have happened in the economy because of the financial issue that we faced it, reform has taken a backseat. That's the truth. So, a lot of us are saying, hey guys, we got a new government, and then, we got to start straight away getting into being another Singapore. No, first of all, the reforms have to happen, and that reforms are hurtful. So IMF says, your nation has gone through a lot of hurt, but we are not yet out of that hurt. So I think we have to leave this challenging next 2 to 3 years, and the question is, how do you manage people's expectations for what you are appointed to for, vis-a-vis the realities of your economy that is recovering, and you have to go through the reform. So how you manage these three condiments is going to be how Sri Lanka is going to get up. So it's a very challenging, and though a lot of people are looking at the government and saying, where are the results now? Been 4 months, but then the question is that at least I think in the way that I look at it is that you have a government which is clean, and it's easy to do because they're not into corruption. At least if now our challenge, in the way I look at it, is that as to how we could contribute and see from our network globally and our network in the private sector as to how we can support the government. I think that it's a responsibility for all of us that has happened, but it's a tough task for the government right now.
Absolutely, and we will discuss further on the role of both the state sector and the private sector in supporting the government, which is the political sector. We'll take a short commercial break right now. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Every day, millions face the impossible. What happens when clean water feels out of reach? When an entire village is left helpless? When it seemed like no one is listening, Gammatha saw the need. Gammatha took action and a community fought back. A water purification system for a village that once had none. Gammatha, for the people, by the people.
Welcome back to Face to Face. We are in conversation with Dr. Rohantha Athukorala, who is the Vice Chairman of the World Rural Tourism Council. Now, Rohantha, we were discussing all the issues that our country has faced, which has stifled our growth. You mentioned the 30-year war, 30-year war rather, and the bankruptcy and so on. But these are all political issues which hopefully are things of the past. The war ended 16 years ago. Time to move on and stop making that an excuse to not go forward into the future. In the same way, our bankruptcy, we're still dealing with it, but again, a political issue caused by politicians. Even our response to COVID, we were late in vaccinating because our government at the time was depending on the Dhammika Paniya and silly things like that. So we have had multiple political disasters, that's what I call them, because our governments have been disasters. Now, here we have a fresh government and a chance to move forward. Of course, it's only 4 months. 4 months is nothing. I mean, I think, personally speaking, a lot has been achieved by this government. But when it comes to, let's say, the state sector, they need to reform. Otherwise, we're dead in the water. There is no point, in my opinion, of having an honest set of politicians in parliament if corruption and mismanagement continues to be rampant in the state sector. So they need to change, and we can't be making excuses for them. They need to start changing now, and they have to do it without having a gun put to their heads. I mean, right now, let's take the police department. They can't find their own IGP. What rubbish is that? In which country on earth? We are the laughing stock of the world. We can't find our own IGP. That's ridiculous. And it's been about a month now that there's been a warrant out. It's just silly. Excuses. And we just, I mean, we need to reform these institutions. How do we get this done? Because it's the same set of people. You can't sort of tell everyone in, you know, customs, inland revenue, excise, police, you can't tell them to go home. How do you get them to turn over a new leaf, to think positively?
See, Diresh, I mean, let's look at a best practice, you know, so that we pick up what was done. If you take a country like Croatia, same story, got out of a war in 1995. It's one of the most brutal wars that it had, and then from 2000 onwards, they decided that they had to start getting an identity. So, you know, they looked at reforms, and it was very painful. It needed an iron fist. It was done with iron fist, and it had to be done. And then the second is that they looked at all the products that they market, and they called it the quality Croatian product. They put a badge on it, tied up with the Ceylon Chambers of Commerce kind of a thing, operation in Croatia. And with the chambers, they took the product in to the global market. Thirdly is that they developed this whole concept of living life to the full with the Croatian tourism experience. Today, you know, their exports are at around 10 to 12%, 12 billion euro. Their tourism you know, revenues are around 25 billion euro, and that country is a classic case study of where they started their identity with tourism, and then they have now built this whole concept of a nation brand, and that happened from within. So that involved, you know, looking at living life to the full with regard to the people and the community, looking at historical sites, looking at sports, looking at tourism, looking at exports. You know, they looked at all the typical 6 pointers that builds brands, and they've achieved it. So there was a degree of iron fist that was used. So and without that you can't change behavior. So I'm just taking an example of Croatia. Another example was Estonia. Same thing happened. Or if you take India, India crashed, the whole economic crash in 1991, and Manmohan Singh came into the fore as I think he was initially finance minister,
and then prime minister.
Then prime minister, and then also again an iron fist was used to drive exports. So we have to have that iron fist, and we also have to look at some degree of reform that happens from education. See, everything starts from education. So for example, we have 17 universities. Now the question is that how much are these universities linked to the private sector? Now I'm involved in the University Grants Commission strategy making team, and one of the recommendations are that every university will be linked to 5 industries. That's something that we are putting on the table, so that then what happens is that when a company requests, when they find there is a data gap, they'll talk to that university which has been stipulated, and maybe those kids will do that for their dissertation work or their postgraduate work, and that data is what will be used for the decision making by the private sector, and then those people will be picked up to the organization. So this link happens, and then if there is some very strong innovation coming in, you have WIPO coming in, intellectual property, and they patent it, and then you can sell those patents in, and we have that knowledge. Now the question is that if this model starts at the ground, we have to get into the fundamentals, because that's where competitiveness comes, and that is where our competition does not exist. So if this happens, then you'll have companies coming and saying, I'm going to buy your innovation, I'm setting it up at the university itself as a business cell, and then expanding it into a free trade zone. Now Naresh, you will ask, is this a book? No, it is not book. It's done in Pakistan. It's done by the National University for Science and Technology, NUST. They get the cream of students into this uni at NUST, it's government. Then the best brains develop these innovations, then it's patented, and you have American companies who come and buy the patent, but they have to set up and they have to employ Pakistanis. And if the companies make traction in the business world, what happens is they give a free trade zone within the university itself. So they extend into a company which has 200 people. So this value chain has to be done, and if this happens, you'll find that our cinnamon, our Ceylon teas, the Ceylon sapphires, the apparel industry, which is a classic case study that worked with University of Moratuwa. Today, the reason why the apparel are competitive is because they got that value chain going with University of Moratuwa. Now the rest of the industries have to follow this, and then you find the competitiveness picking up, and then you find that your exports of hitting 25 to 30 billion becomes natural. It's not it does not have to be it doesn't have to have major reforms, because the system drives it. So now we have to start from there, and we know that the current government is very strongly into education. The Prime Minister has very clearly said that education is not a commodity. It is the right for everybody to be educated. So if this reform happens at the education end, then you'll find that that will start having the ripple impacts in the private sector, and in turn you'll have all the support services that will have to come in with digitalization. So I think we got a golden chance, Naresh, at this time. I hope that the municipal council elections,
the local government elections, which are likely to come up in May. The date will be announced on the 20th of March.
So that is crucial, because we know that from 9% more to 30% of the people's income is more than expenditure, and now it is at 44%, but there is 56% who thought things are going to be majorly different, which has not happened. And that's why we see the share of voice every time on any news channel, including TV. There is an uproar. So we have to make sure that that is managed, and if that is managed properly, chances are that Sri Lanka has got a clear window for the next 3 to 4 years to do these reforms at the education end, and then it will start hitting the rest of the industries, and then of course the digitalization process is going to help any economy to succeed. Now, as I again told you, with regard to Croatia, Estonia and India, there was an iron-fisted hand that had to do that. So if you don't do that, you can't change behavior. I mean, that's the reality.
Now you mentioned the term best practices. Best practices are things which, I mean, the world has accepted, and it changes. The best practices today will be obsolete next year. There'll be better best practices next year, and countries need to adopt these. Government departments need to, private sector companies, we all need to adopt these, otherwise we are going to be stuck.
Yeah.
And this is the crucial aspect. You mentioned India, Croatia, Estonia, so many countries which basically said we're going to adopt all these global best practices. Yeah. It is not that Croatia invented anything.
Yeah.
You know, they simply took the knowledge that is out there in the world.
Yeah.
Now in Sri Lanka we have this major issue of not adopting best practices. Much of the private sector does. I mean, today I walked into a bank and asked for a deposit slip, and they said, no sir, we don't have those anymore, we have an app. And quickly install it on my phone, and there we go. So that's nice to see. But when you go to the state sector, rather, you could have gone there 50 years ago, it is the same thing.
Yeah.
And those guys, it's not that they don't know that the rest of the world has changed. When you go to the customs department, customs officials go to conferences, you know, in other countries, they see the best practices, they experience it, they come back here and they're back to paper. Yeah. And if you try to automate customs, which has been tried before for decades, they resist it. So what's the hang up here?
See, Naresh, I mean, look at the other side. I mean, I worked in the public sector, you know, and what I see is that the best brains of Sri Lanka is in the public sector. If you don't have a first class or a second class honors, you can't get into the public sector because there's a competitive exam. So with regard to the knowledge, they have it.
Exactly.
Now, what do they need? They need some strong leadership. And if you look at for the last 15-20 years, we see how leaders have come and then they get involved in corruption, and any public sector official who is not into it gets sidelined. And we saw how many public sector officials also going to prison because they were asked to do, they just did what they were asked to do, and some of them dwelled into it. So the mistake is on the leadership. Now, if we can get the proper leadership going, I know that the public sector will adhere to new norms. They are prepared to change, but so far we have let them down, and that's the truth. If you look at every single organization, I mean, let's take Sri Lankan Airlines. Is it the mistake of the Sri Lankan Airlines employees, or is it the leadership? I mean, how come when Emirates managed it, it made a profit, but as soon as we started running the airline, we started making a loss? So you can take case study after case study and you'll see it's a leadership that has made the public sector for what it is now. So I think current administration has that credibility as at now from what we see, and I think if we can continue with this kind of leadership, maybe it's going to take a little bit of time because it's a slightly slower pace, but I think if that happens, you might have this would be the trigger for the public sector to become competitive. And it needs this iron-fisted view also, because what you said is so true. I mean, when you really go to see the public sector, about I think 15 or 16 years back, we had 6 lakhs. I think in 2005, we had only 600,000 people in the public sector. Today, we have 1.5 million. So Now, why were they recruited? Was there a basis of recruitment? And then you'll see where the problem is. So I would have a different view, Naresh, which is that since I worked in the public sector, I'm saying that the skill set of theirs is good. They need some strong leadership, and if the leadership comes, we will see them turning their behavior around. And then, of course, you'll have to have the reforms which tells you that if you behave well, you are remunerated, just like in the private sector. And with that, you'll have some kind of change which is much more permanent in nature. Now, yes, this is going to be hurtful, and doing this when IMF is looking down on you and telling them, listen, you can't recruit people, and you got to make sure that your revenues are going to be 15% of GDP when you're currently at 13%. You got to make sure your deficit is going to be at 2.4. I mean, managing these numbers whilst looking at that strategic angle of changing behavior, it's tough, very, very tough. Now, we know currently as we speak the challenge that we have with the medical profession. They're saying, I want to see my first salary in April. It's only then that I will believe what your budget was. So how do you balance this, and to make sure that 56% is the only people whose income is less than expenditure? How do I make that 70%? How do you manage this triangular thing? It's very tough, and only way forward is that we need to support.
Now, you mentioned the local government elections, Rohantha. At the moment, we simply have a cabinet and parliament, but at the local level, more than 300 local government institutions are functioning without councillors, functioning in the same way that they did 30 years ago, which is very inefficiently, lethargically. But now, once we have the election, and the new councils, I believe, will take office somewhere around June. At that point, you have a bunch of new councillors coming in who are expected to make things work. Do you see a sea change here happening at the local level? Because yes, we have some hundreds of state-owned enterprises which need reform, but we need to reform these Pradeshya Sabhas, these urban councils, municipal councils, because millions of people interact with those councils every week.
Tough question, Naresh, because if you look at November, you had what, 43% people giving a mandate.
Well,
and then in
September.
December, September. Then in December, you had about 60% mandate coming in. And, so the momentum was picking up. I mean, here was a brand which just got 3 votes 6 months back, 3 cabinet, parliamentary votes at the election. So
6 years ago.
Yeah, so, things are moving, but the acid test is going to be the local government elections, and I think the brand has to show some kind of delivery to the people to put food on the table. Because if you really look at the savings, which I actually forgot to tell you, Naresh, the saving level is dropping, and in every town you see a pawning center. And people are pawning their jewelry, they are now pawning their white goods, right? It has come to that. And if you really study, you'll see this consumer behavior, which is all research driven. So now we need to up this, and if you don't get at least 60% of the population whose income can cover the cost with research backing, and from the data I'm getting right now, it's slightly tanking. It's going back, right? But we'll have to watch and see how it goes. If that point is not addressed, your third election result is not going to be very powerful. It's not going to be very powerful with regard to the reform agenda. And if you don't have that kind of support at the ground level, implementation becomes tough. Because at the end of the day, your budget gets implemented at the provincial level, at the ground end, and you need support there. So I think I mean there's nothing that the private sector can do here, because this is going to be totally between the government and the people at the lower levels as to see how that convincing could happen. But if I think we are wishing that it would happen and that support will come, so that then you have mandate up there. You got a mandate in terms of governing the country at a ministerial level, and then you have a mandate at in the implementation at the lower level. And if that is there, I think we are poised to be a 7%, 8% GDP growth with reform in tourism and exports, and
well, your optimism is heartening indeed. But let's talk a little bit more about exports. We still are stuck with the traditional exports, and we have, of course, tourism, which while the war was going on, that was dead in the water. But after the war, well, that's great things are expected of it. But apart from that, what industries do we need to focus on? And I'm talking in terms of the global supply chains and integrating into it.
See, Niresh, again, reforms. It's very challenging. Now, I'll just take one industry. For example, if you look at the tea industry, I mean, we all talk about Ceylon tea, but do we know that the production of Ceylon tea is coming down drastically? Drastically. We were at 300 million kilograms of tea, which was what we produced some years back. It came to 280, then it came down to 260, and this year we will be at about 250 million kilograms of tea. We have lost almost 60 million kilograms of tea. Why? Because our tea stock is aging. Almost 90% of our tea stock happens to be over 60 years of age. So now if you don't do this replanting, and we know that replanting costs are colossal now. At one time, per square area, it was about square kilometers about 2 million, then it became 4 million, now it must be touching about 5-6 million. So then, when you plant, what is your ROI? You are looking at an IRR of at least 15-16% currently. You don't get that, because your tea stock needs 7 years to come to bearing. So you have a supply chain issue,
yes,
which needs to be reformed. Some funding has to be put to planting of the trees. Go back to fundamentals. Number two is in terms of the demand chain. If you are saying that you are stuck with 250 million kilograms of tea is what you can export, it means that it's going to give you $1.5 to $2 billion. That's it.
Yeah.
So then the private sector has been continuously telling, it's a school of thought, liberalize. And then, you can allow imports of cheaper teas to come in, and then you would mix it, blend it, and then you will cater to
which is what happens to much of our tea anyway. We send it off to Europe, and that's what happens.
Absolutely. They blend it there and they would sell it, because at the end of the day,
and they make a lot more money off our tea than we do.
And there, the challenge is what? Consumer orientation. They will come and say, okay, Niresh, what would you like to drink? And you can say whether you're going to have water, you're going to have milk, whether you're going to have iced tea, whether you're going to have a cola. Now that spectrum is there. But if you continuously keep on saying, no, we are the connoisseurs of tea, we must be like the Brazilian coffee, and then we have to be Ceylon tea. I'm not saying there are for and against both the schools of thought. But then the question is that, again, you go back to universities, do a proper research, understand the ramifications of this decision, take the decision from a supply demand chain, and ask yourself, can I make this $5 billion? Is it worth?
Educated decision making.
Yeah.
None of this knee-jerk decision making like no more chemical fertilizer sort of nonsense.
So I just took one example of our export sector, Niresh, and said that we got to look at reform from a supply side and a demand side. So likewise, this has to be done to every sector. I mean, the other day I was talking to a apparel top end, and he was saying, somewhere down the road, the apparel industry lost its way. So I said, why do you say that? I said, apparel is now doing about $5.5 billion. He said, yeah, but 10 years, 15 years back, we had 200 people on the shopping floor. Today, we yet have 200. 20 years back, automobile industry also had 200 in the shopping floor. Today, they have 5. So, there's something where we didn't latch on to technology. We were in the comfort zone, and now there is a challenge where we have not looked at it. So, the world is moving so fast, Niresh, unless we link this education to decision making through technology, and if you're not going to focus on these 3 things, we cannot be another, we can't move in terms of actually meeting the IMF expectations. It's not going to work. It starts from there.
Well, I tend not to look at the IMF expectations. I tend to look at my expectations, what I want this country to become, because it's been a long, long time. And we put up with all this 30-year war nonsense and all that. And I think Sri Lankans deserve a lot more. I'm afraid we are out of time, Rohantha. It's been an enthralling discussion. Thank you very much for coming in. That's Dr. Rohantha Athukorala, Vice Chairman of the World Rural Tourism Council. And thank you to you at home for watching. Don't go away because the news is coming up next. Have a great evening.